Right now, as you listen to this, you might be hearing another voice too. Not mine, yours. A narrator that repeats words as you read them. A commentator that argues with you in the shower. A voice that says, "Don't forget to text them back." Most people assume that voice is universal, that it's just what thinking is. But for a surprising number of people, it doesn't exist at all. No internal monologue, no voiceover, no running commentary, just silence. And if you do have a voice in your head, that idea can feel impossible. Because how could you plan, or reflect, or even be you without words? But if you don't have one, the opposite can feel just as strange. How do other people tolerate a mind that never stops talking? Tonight, we're going to map a hidden spectrum inside human consciousness. What inner speech actually is, why it varies so much, how scientists measure it, and what it reveals about anxiety, memory, identity, and the private story you call me. And by the end, you'll probably realize something unsettling. You've been assuming everyone experiences reality the way you do. They don't. Let's start with the illusion. Because the reason this is so hard to imagine is simple. Your brain treats your inner experience as the default model for humanity. If you hear a voice in your head, it feels like the way minds work. If you don't, your kind of thinking feels normal too. And you might not even realize other people mean it literally when they say, "I was talking to myself." For years, this difference barely showed up in science because it's difficult to study something that leaves no footprints. Thought doesn't have a microphone, so psychologists had to build one. One of the strangest tools ever invented for this problem is called descriptive experience sampling. It's associated with a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt, who spent decades trying to answer a question that sounds simple, but isn't. What is actually happening in your mind in a normal moment? Not what you think is happening, not what you remember later, what's happening right then. The method is almost brutally straightforward. People carry a beeper at random times during the day. Beep. They freeze and write down what was in their awareness right before the beep. Not their interpretation of it, not their explanation, just the raw experience. And what Hurlburt and others found is that inner life comes in many forms. Sometimes it's inner speech, actual words internally said. Sometimes it's inner seeing, images, scenes, flashes of faces. Sometimes it's emotion without language. Sometimes it's something researchers call unsymbolized thinking, a clear, structured thought with no words and no pictures attached. That last one is especially hard for people with strong inner monologues to imagine, but participants describe it consistently, like knowing the answer before any sentence appears. And here's the key point. Even among people who can use inner speech, it's not always running. For some, it's frequent and automatic. For others, it shows up only when they deliberately turn it on, like using words to rehearse a phone call or to force focus. Which brings us to the first major takeaway. Inner monologue isn't a universal constant. It's a variable. And for some people, that variable is set near zero. So what does no voice in your head actually mean? It doesn't mean someone has no thoughts. It doesn't mean they're calm or empty or less intelligent. It means their thoughts don't arrive in the form of internal sentences. They might think in patterns, spatial relationships, emotional signals, concepts with no verbal wrapper or mental imagery. And this is where the internet often mixes up two different things. You may have heard of aphantasia, the inability to voluntarily visualize images. People with aphantasia can't see a beach in their mind when they close their eyes. But aphantasia is about mental pictures. Inner monologue is about mental words. You can have vivid imagery, and no inner speech. Inner speech and no imagery. Both or neither in the way you expect. Human minds are modular like that. Now here's the part that changes the story. Inner speech isn't just a feature you're born with. It's something you build. There's an old idea in developmental psychology, associated with Lev Vygotsky, that children first use speech as a tool in the world, then as a tool directed at themselves. If you've ever heard a little kid narrating their actions, "Now I put this here." No, not that. Okay, you've witnessed it. That's called private speech. And over time, in many kids, private speech becomes internal. The out-loud coaching voice moves inside the skull. It gets quieter. It gets faster. It becomes shorthand. In adults, inner speech can shrink into fragments: idiot, keys, focus, or a whole debate with yourself, like a courtroom drama. But if inner speech is a learned tool, then it makes sense that people would learn it differently or rely on other tools instead. Some researchers have even started using terms like anendophasia to describe the experience of having little to no inner speech, not as a disorder, as a cognitive profile. So how do you know which kind of mind you have? Try this. Don't do it while driving. Think about what you're doing tomorrow morning. Do you hear a sentence like, "I need to wake up early"? Or do you just know it? Now imagine a difficult text message you might have to send. Do you rehearse exact wording in your head? Do you audition sentences like an actor? Or do you feel the intent? Awkward, careful, apologetic, without any internal script. For many people, the difference becomes obvious right here. Some minds are verbal by default, some are not. Now, if you're a strong inner monologue person, you might be thinking, okay, but words are how we reason. How can you think clearly without them? Because your brain has multiple ways to do clarity. Consider a simple example: mental rotation. If I show you a shape and ask you whether it matches another shape rotated 90 degrees, many people solve it with no words at all. They just rotate it internally. Or consider social intuition. You can walk into a room and sense tension instantly, even if you can't yet put it into a sentence. Words often come after the understanding. For some people, words come after almost everything. That doesn't make the understanding less real. It just means it lives in a different format. But inner speech does have functions. It's linked to self-control, talking yourself through hard tasks. It can support working memory, keeping a phone number active by repeating it. It can help with planning, reflecting, and learning. And it can also do something else. It can hurt you, because the voice in your head is not automatically kind. For some people, inner monologue becomes a constant evaluator. You're behind. You're embarrassing. They don't like you. You always do this. It becomes a machine for rumination. And this is one reason the silent mind idea fascinates people. Some individuals with minimal inner speech report less verbal self-criticism, not necessarily less anxiety, but less narrated anxiety. Their stress may appear as body feeling or mental pressure or images rather than a sentence that loops for hours. Meanwhile, people with very active inner speech can feel like they're trapped with an announcer who never takes a day off. So the question isn't which one is better. The question is, what trade-offs did your brain pick without asking you? And now we reach the most unsettling connection of all. Because inner speech sits right next to a phenomenon that looks similar, but isn't: auditory hallucinations. Some theories in cognitive neuroscience propose that certain hallucinated voices can involve the brain misidentifying internally generated speech as coming from outside. In other words, A signal that normally gets tagged as me can, under some conditions, get tagged as not me. That doesn't mean inner monologue causes hallucinations. Most people with inner speech never hallucinate, and hallucinations have many causes and layers, but it does highlight something important. The voice in your head is not a magical thing. It's a brain process, and the boundary between thought and perception is thinner than it feels. So why does this topic go viral? Because it attacks a deep assumption. That language is the core of consciousness. But for many people, language is more like a user interface, a layer you can use, a tool you can pick up, not the engine itself. And when you realize that, you start noticing something everywhere. Two people can agree on facts and still live in completely different inner worlds. One person's mind is a courtroom of sentences. Another person's mind is a map. Another person's mind is a mood board of images. Another person's mind is mostly sensations and silent knowing. They all function. They all feel normal from the inside, and they all misunderstand each other. This also changes how you interpret simple phrases. Follow your gut. For one person, that's a metaphor. For another person, it's literal, a physical signal that guides decisions. Talk it out with yourself. For one person, that's daily life. For another, it's like being asked to turn feelings into subtitles and clear your mind. Some people can't imagine silence. Others have been living in it the whole time. So what should you do with this? First, if you have little or no inner monologue, you're not broken. You're not missing thought. You're missing one format of thought. If anything, you may have access to forms of cognition that are harder for verbal thinkers to reach, because verbal thinkers keep trying to convert everything into words. Second, if you do have a constant inner narrator, it's worth remembering something oddly liberating. The voice is not you. It's something you have, and you can change how you use it. Some people learn to treat inner speech like a tool they pick up intentionally, for planning, for learning, for kindness, and set down when it becomes noise, not by stopping thoughts through force, but by shifting attention to other channels, sensation, vision, action, breath. Because your brain can think without narrating. It already does, more than you realize. And finally, here's the strangest part. The reason this difference feels so shocking is that consciousness is private. You never get to step into someone else's inner world. You only get their translations, their words, their art, their behavior, their pauses. So we grow up assuming everyone's mind is basically like ours, just with different opinions. But it's deeper than that. Some people live with a constant storyteller. Some people live with a quiet knowing. Some people live with images. Some people live with none of the above in the way you mean it. And each version of mind creates a different kind of suffering, a different kind of creativity, a different kind of peace. You might have started this video thinking the question was, do I have an inner monologue or not? But the real question is, how many different ways can a human being be conscious and still look the same from the outside? Because if the voice in your head can be absent in someone else, then your inner life isn't the blueprint for humanity. It's just one design. And once you accept that, you start to see other people more accurately, not as irrational versions of you, but as minds running different software, doing their best to translate their reality into words you can understand. Some of them are translating from a place with a narrator. Some of them are translating from somewhere silent. And either way, there's a whole world in there you'll never hear, unless they find the language for it and you learn to believe them.